Hi, everyone. I hope you're able to hear me okay. We'll give everybody just one more minute. It looks like some people just logged in. Thanks, Greg. All right, well, let me share my screen. We're going to go ahead and get started. Okay. Oops, sorry, guys. All right. Let me find it again. There we go. I think I have too many windows up. Okay. There we go. All right. Can everybody see this okay? Let's see. Carla, if you're still on, is there a way that I can see the chat on my screen? Oh, here we go. Okay, perfect. Okay, so, oh, will it not let me? Okay, it looks like I'm not able to see the chat and do present mode at the same time, so we'll just pause for questions throughout. But we are here today to talk about the power of reinforcement. And this is a topic I'm really passionate about, so I'm so excited to talk with you guys about it. But first, before we get started, well, first I'll introduce myself. My name is Kelsey Helsper. I've been with Bierman for just over 7 years now. So I started as a BT, and then I was in a training role, then I got my BCBA, and now I've been focusing mostly on parent training. So I am really excited about that because I'm also a mother myself. So I feel like I can relate to being a parent and, sometimes the struggle of that. So I'm excited to talk about it. So first, before we get started, let's talk about how you guys can communicate with me throughout this presentation. So I really encourage participation. It really helps to relate to the content and apply it to your daily life. So some ways that you can participate during this is I will just pause throughout the presentation to share real life examples. And I designed this presentation to be as interactive as possible because I would love to hear about you guys' experience with this. So to share your examples, you can feel free to type them into the chat. And it looks like a couple of you were already able to use the chat. Okay, and then we'll practice here in a second just to make sure everybody feels comfortable with it. And then you can also use the raise hand feature. So if you raise your hand, like I said, I'll pause periodically to just check and see if anybody has any questions or wants to communicate, and we'll pause for questions and stuff too. So, and then you can share them aloud with the group if you would rather do that. So you can use the chat feature, or if you would rather share aloud, you can use the raise hand. Also, I wanted to add this little screenshot of what it should look like at the bottom of your chat. So you can either choose to share just with me, the panelist, or you can choose to share with me and the rest of the attendees. So it's whatever your preference is, whatever you're comfortable with. But yeah, you can use that in the chat feature as well. And then for asking questions, again, you can use the raise hand feature if you want to ask your question aloud for the group, or if you want to ask your question and just type it out while I'm talking, you can enter it into the Q&A. So the Q&A is right here. So if you type in your question, I will be the only one to see it. And then once I answer the question, I'll click that I answered it, and then those questions will be visible to all of you. So feel free to use any of those features. Please stop me if you have any questions about that. I'm gonna get out of present mode just to make sure nobody has any questions. Okay, perfect. Then we will keep going. So the first thing that I want to do is just to make sure you guys are all feeling comfortable using the chat feature. I'm going to have you answer this question. So, how much ABA experience do you and your family have? And then answer in the chat with the number that represents you and your family. So, number one being no previous ABA experience. So, maybe you're on the wait list or you haven't started services yet. Two being less than 3 months. Three being 3 months to a year. And then four being more than a year. Oops, sorry guys. There we go. Okay. All right, great. So it looks like all of you have at least a little bit of experience. So I see a few number twos, some number threes, and some number fours. So we have a wide variety, which will make this discussion really great because you guys all have varied experiences. So let's keep going here. Okay. All right, so for our agenda, we are going to talk a lot about reinforcement. We're going to categorize those into positive and negative reinforcement. We're also going to talk about the difference between reinforcement and reinforcers and talk about some different types of reinforcers. And I categorize them into 3 different categories labeled social, tangible, and activity. And we'll talk more about that, what that means too. And then we're going to talk about why it's important and how you can apply it to your lives. And I really love this little quote over here. And I think it is a great thing that relates to what we're going to talk about is behavior goes where reinforcement flows. So using reinforcement to guide changes in behavior and what we want to see the behavior look like. Okay, so what is reinforcement? So reinforcement occurs when whatever happens after the behavior, so we call that the consequence, strengthens the behavior or makes it more likely to occur in the future. So reinforcement is always going to strengthen that behavior. And then reinforcement can be used to shape any behavior. So, we're talking about it now in relation to our children, but reinforcement can shape any behavior. It can shape my behavior, your dog's behavior, your child's behavior. Any behavior can be shaped using reinforcement. So let's dive into a couple examples. So Henry points to an apple and his mom gives him the apple. In the future, it is likely that Henry will point to the apple again when he wants it. So in this example, the apple is the reinforcer for pointing. So Henry was able to access the apple because he pointed to it. So it's likely that in the future, when Henry is hungry for an apple again, he'll try to point for it because that's what gave him access to the apple the first time. And then in the second example, so you wake up with a headache and you take some Tylenol. Shortly after the Tylenol kicks in and your headache is gone. The next time you have a headache, you will likely take some Tylenol to get rid of it. So in this example, your headache goes away and the reinforcer is Tylenol. So taking Tylenol is going to be the behavior that happens or that is more likely to happen whenever you get a headache so that headache goes away. And so each of those are examples of different types of reinforcement. And we're going to talk more about positive and versus negative reinforcement. I'm just going to get out of here just to make sure we don't have any questions. All right. Okay, so positive reinforcement. Let's talk more about that one first. So, positive reinforcement is adding anything preferred or reinforcing following a behavior. So, some more examples of that are getting money for completing your chores, getting a high five and praise when answering a question correctly, or getting a treat after following the direction to sit. So you can see a pattern in all of these examples that something preferred is added after the target behavior. And it's more likely in the future that those behaviors are going to keep happening because they got something good out of it or they got something reinforcing out of it. So let's talk about some more examples. So in this one, I would like you guys to share your answers to some things. So as a reminder, you can use the chat or you can use the raise hand feature, and I can call on some people if you'd like to answer aloud. So Bailey asks his friend for a block, and the friend hands him a block. He uses that block to continue making a tower. So in the future, what is likely to happen when Bailey wants a block? Oops. Sorry, guys. I'm going to get out of here just so I can see the chat. Yep, I see a couple answers trickling in. So people are saying he's going to ask again. And that's exactly correct. So when Bailey wants a block, he's going to ask for it again. And do you know why that is? Yep, exactly. So a couple answers have been because he received it after asking, or when he gets the block, he can continue building because he got what he wanted. All of those answers are correct. So because he got something reinforcing out of it, or he got his desired outcome, he's likely going to use his language to ask again in the future because he got exactly what he wanted out of it. So what if Bailey's friend hadn't handed him the block? What do you guys think may happen in the future now? Oh, sorry, Jennifer, to hear your video is freezing. Hopefully, is that happening for anybody else? Okay. It seems like everybody else's videos aren't freezing, so you might just want to try to log out and log back in, maybe. Um, but some of your answers for what if Bailey's friend hadn't handed him the block. So he may just take it and not ask. He may try another strategy. And that's exactly right as well. So it's less likely that Bailey is going to ask again because if asking did not give him the desired outcome that he wanted, then it's likely, he still wants the block. So he's going to try to find another way to get it. So, exactly right. So you can kind of relate this to some of your own examples too of, if your child was trying to ask for something and maybe somebody didn't hear them, or maybe it was a peer who didn't want to share, then you can see where some of those challenging behaviors may pop up to try to get what they want out of the situation. Okay, we'll go back into present mode. Let's talk about another example. So Carmen sets her alarm for 7 a.m. At that exact time in the morning, her alarm rang and she got out of bed to get ready for work. So in the future, what is Carmen likely to do when she has to get up in the morning? Yep, good. All of your answers are the same here. So she's likely to set her alarm. Good. Why is she likely to set her alarm? Yep, good. So because it worked, her alarm gets her up. Um, it worked this time, perfect. So she's likely to do it again because it got her the outcome she wanted. So again, what if her alarm hadn't gone off? Yep, she may have tried another strategy. She would have slept in, and next time she would find a different way to wake up. She would not use it to get her up, or maybe she'd try it again and come up with another strategy. So, yep, you guys are spot on. She is less likely to use her alarm again in the future because it didn't produce the outcome that she was wanting. Um, so yeah, it's not if it's not going to get her the results that she wanted, then she's going to find a different way to get that outcome. All right, so we're going to go to another example. So you go to work and you do your job, and then you get a paycheck. So in the future, are you likely to go back to your job and do your work, and why? All right, some answers. So yes, I want to be paid. Yes, because you got the money. Yes, because you got paid. Or if you want to continue to receive a paycheck, you're going to continue to go to work. Perfect. So um, and then you guys have been so spot on. We don't have to answer this last one, but you can see the pattern here is if they stopped getting a paycheck, if you stopped getting a paycheck, then you probably would be less likely to go to work, or maybe you'd be more likely to call in sick or skip work a day. So it's very important that the reinforcement be in place, because without that reinforcement, you can see where behavior starts to drift or shift away. All right, we're going to do one more example for positive reinforcement. So Emma screams in the grocery store until her mom gives her a piece of candy. So in the future, what is Emma likely to do when she wants a piece of candy, and why? Yep, scream until she gets it, scream because it gets her candy, she screams since it worked before to get her candy. Exactly. Um, and I added this example because I know that I've been there in a grocery store, and I know a lot of parents can relate to a situation like this. So you can see, you know, in that situation, it's not convenient, to have your child be screaming in the store and being disruptive. But you can see the pattern here. If they're contacting that reinforcement and they're getting what they want out of that situation, then it's likely going to happen the next time that you go to the store, and the next time, because that's what they got previously, and they think you're probably going to give in again. So, it's just really important to identify those patterns in behavior so that we can realize how we can shift that and make the behaviors that we want to see happen increase, and the behaviors we don't want to see happen decrease. All right, so let's now talk about negative reinforcement. Oh, actually, before we do that, so I'd love for you guys to share some real life examples that you have. Maybe they're really similar to the ones we already shared, maybe they're different, but if you guys can think of some examples of positive reinforcement or how it's been used in your daily life, I would love to hear about it. So feel free again to type that in the chat. Feel free to push the raise hand button and I can unmute you so you can share with the group. All right, so I'll share this one that was written in the comments. So somebody wrote compliments or getting paid. So I'm sure we can all relate to the getting paid example that we already used, getting paid whenever we go to work. But yeah, receiving compliments. So, if you got complimented on, let's say, your wardrobe, maybe you wore a jacket that everybody kept complimenting, you're likely to wear that jacket again because you want to get those compliments again. This one says, so our son often screams to get what he wants, and we give him what he wants. So, yeah, it can be a really tricky situation. I'm really glad you brought up that example because, like I said, reinforcement can happen with us or our kids. And sometimes it's happening to both people at the same time. So, um, in that example, your son is getting what he wants, so he's likely to scream again, but you have contacted reinforcement there as well because you're getting him to stop screaming, which is reinforcing to you. So, you're likely to give him what he wants because the screaming is stopping, which is what is desirable for you. So, you can see kind of where we sometimes refer to that as the behavioral trap. So, you can see how you can get in this kind of trap of behavior where you're just trying to get that behavior to stop as quickly as possible. But we'll talk about this a little later, but something that would be preferable to do in that situation is to maybe just have your son say something, like say the word of the item that he wants, or if he can't communicate vocally, maybe he can point to that item. But just something simple and quick and easy that he can do that you would like to see increase. So over time, hopefully, if you remain consistent with that, you can see that the screaming starts to decrease and the pointing or the asking for something starts to increase. But I know in the moment that can be really hard to do as well. All right. Those were great examples. If anybody has any more, feel free to add them into the chat and we can kind of circle back to some examples too later if we have some more time. But we will just go on and talk about negative reinforcement. So negative reinforcement. So I feel like the word negative kind of has a bad rep. So when we talk about negative reinforcement, we don't mean something bad. And it doesn't mean something bad has to happen. So negative reinforcement in ABA is talking about avoiding or removing something negative. So the outcome, the item, or the environment by engaging in a behavior. So here are some examples of what I mean by that. So putting on sunscreen to avoid getting a sunburn. So in this example, this girl obviously in the past has gotten a sunburn. She wants to keep that from happening again. She doesn't want to get a sunburn. So she puts on sunscreen to avoid that situation. So that would be an example of negative reinforcement. Also, if somebody didn't want to have body odor or anything like that, they would take a shower to avoid or remove having that body odor. So, those are examples of situations where people are trying to avoid something happening or avoid an outcome. All right, so much like our positive reinforcement examples, we're going to go through several more, and I'd love for you guys to continue using the chat feature to answer. So in example one, okay. For example one, Gwen got stuck in traffic yesterday and was late to work. She decides to leave for work 15 minutes early today to make sure she arrives on time. She runs into traffic again, but since she left early, she still arrives 5 minutes early. So in the future, what is Gwen most likely going to do to avoid being late and why? Yep, so all of you are answering correctly. So leave 15 minutes early since she arrived on time, leave early so that she'll be on time. Um, exactly. She's going to leave early again because that produced the outcome that she was looking for. So, what would happen if Gwen was still late to work? Yep, somebody said she could leave even earlier. Yep, find a different route or a different mode of transportation. I like that one too, thinking outside of the box. Yeah, maybe leave 30 minutes early instead of 15. Um, try again or try a different route. Perfect, guys. So, yeah, you can see if you're not getting the outcome that you want, then you're likely going to change your approach and change the behavior that you emit. Oops. Okay. So here's another example. So Mariah decided to wear her favorite dress to school. When she gets to the cafeteria for lunch, she realizes her mom packed her spaghetti. To avoid getting her favorite dress dirty, Mariah covers her dress with a napkin before eating. So, again, in the future, what is Mariah most likely going to do when she wants to keep her clothes clean and why? Yep, she will cover with a napkin when to keep her clothes clean. Wear a napkin because it worked. Cover herself with something. She could cover herself with something else, not just a napkin. Um, but exactly, she's going to do that same thing again because it produced the outcome she was looking for. And then what would happen if Mariah still got spaghetti on her dress? Yep, somebody said she may just avoid the spaghetti altogether. That's definitely true if she loves the dress so much. Don't wear nice clothes on spaghetti day. Um, she might get upset with her mom. Yeah. Or maybe she would ask her mom, to tell her what she's having for lunch before she puts on her nice dress again. Perfect. So, yeah, she doesn't want that to happen in the future. So she's not going to make the same mistake twice. All right, so next example, Jackson is struggling to complete his math problems during class. He decides to swipe his paper off his desk and break his pencil, showing that he's frustrated. So his teacher tells him to go to another area of the classroom to cool down. So, in the future, what is Jackson likely to do if he needs help or wants a break from the task and why? Yep, swipe and break his pencil again. Good. And then what would happen if Jackson didn't get a break from his task or didn't get the help that he wanted? What are some things that he could do? Yep, I like this one. So he would maybe raise his hand for help. His behavior might escalate. You're right. If maybe he has a hard time communicating. So maybe raising his hand is something he doesn't really know how to do yet. So you're right. His behavior might escalate and get worse. But I like that you guys are providing kind of positive and or good outcomes and bad outcomes for um, this example as well, because you can see if you're in the teacher's shoes in this example, what you can do to help Jackson. So maybe you model raising your hand. If Jackson's behavior is escalating, maybe you can show him the behavior that you're looking for, or maybe you can. Just give him a prompt of any kind to get him to do what you want him to do before you give him a break or before you help him. But yeah, he's likely just going to try some other way to get out of doing the math problems in the future. All right, and then the last example for negative. So Vera often wakes up in the middle of the night and begins to cry. Her mom comes in to see what is wrong, and then she stops crying. So her mom stays in the room until after she falls back asleep. So you guys can just answer all of these questions kind of in one. So in the future, what's Vera going to do? Why is that going to happen? And what would happen if Vera didn't stop crying? Yep. So some of the answers that are trickling in. So for the first one, so she's probably going to cry again because she got mom before. But if that didn't produce the outcome she was looking for, she may just fall back asleep on her own if mom doesn't come in. And self-soothe a little bit. I liked this example a lot because, as I'm sure you all being parents can relate to this scenario. So, but it is a good way to think about it and think about what we can always do to help teach new and positive behaviors. So another answer is she's going to go in the room and stay again. And if she doesn't, then she may not continue crying. Um, Perfect. Yeah, you guys are right on track. So again, I would love for you guys to share some of your own personal examples that you can think of with negative reinforcement. You can just comment that you relate to any of the examples that I provided, or I would love to hear any more if you guys have any to share. Okay, this is a good example that was added. So if a child screams when a peer comes up, and then the teacher removes that peer, um, so you can see that the child probably screamed because they didn't want the peer in their environment. And then what the teacher did was remove that peer. So it's likely in that scenario that the child is going to scream again whenever they don't want a peer around. So and thinking about what you could do to shape a more appropriate behavior, you could get that individual who seems to be agitated by a peer approaching to say, use their words to say, go away, or, this is mine, or whatever it may be. Or you could have them shake their head no, or maybe they could ask to go somewhere else. All of those would be appropriate ways that you could reinforce something more desirable. Let me scroll back up because you guys are doing a good job answering some of these. Um, so I make a tall, strong cup of coffee every morning to avoid feeling sleepy when my day starts. I can definitely relate to that one. So yes, I actually, my husband this week, one morning asked me, he's like, "Why are you so cranky this morning?" I was like, "Because I haven't had my coffee." So yeah, you can see how doing something like that every morning and setting yourself up for success can help you, be in a better mood that day, and you can start to identify those patterns for yourself and for your kids that will just set them up for success and make sure that we can start the day off reinforcing something appropriate. Okay, thank you guys for sharing. All right, I'm going to go back into present mode. Okay, so we've talked a lot about reinforcement and you guys provided some great examples. Now we're going to talk about a reinforcer and how it relates to reinforcement and how it's a little bit different. So, a reinforcer is anything that your child highly prefers that could be used as a reinforcer. So, reinforcers can be classified into many different categories, but here are a few common ones and some examples of those. So, social reinforcement is any reinforcer that involves another person. So you can think, if you guys want to share in the chat too, some that you can think of, feel free to go ahead and do that as I'm talking about it. So some social ones that I thought of are giving hugs or tickles, a high five or praise. Then another category is tangible or an item. So that could be candy, a toy, the iPad, maybe a special blanket or lovey. And then activity. So playing a board game, going outside, riding a bike. Depending on the individual, obviously reinforcers are going to be specific to that person. So not everybody is going to like the same things. And even if something is a reinforcer, it doesn't always, or even if somebody likes something, it doesn't always mean that it's going to be a reinforcer if they're just not in the mood for that item right now. So we'll talk a little bit about that more in depth after we talk through some examples. But just remember that we're always trying to pay attention to what is preferred right now, and we're not trying to assume what was preferred before. So paying attention to that cue and just letting the person kind of guide what they're interested in can be really helpful. So let me exit out of here and see if you guys let's identify some of these together. So take a couple of minutes, use the chat again, and think about some of your child's favorite activities or items. So let's pick 3 different things. So you can pick one from each category, or you can pick all from one category, whatever your child is into, and then explain why you think those things act as a reinforcer. All right, I'll start to share some of the ones that are trickling in. So, food, iPad, outside, trampoline time, those all sound like really fun things. Milk and food, pretzels. And this one says um, he loves them, and when he's upset, they calm him down. So, trains, fruit snacks, swimming, a stuffed elephant, riding a bike, the trampoline, maybe going somewhere special or playing a game. Those are all great examples of some different reinforcers. Going outside and TV. So you can see that they're all going to be individualized. And like I said, they're not always going to be a reinforcer per se. It depends on the motivation of the person. Let's say they had a lot of tablet time or TV time in the morning, and then you want to ask them to do something that's really hard. So let's say you have them go brush their teeth, or maybe it's mealtime and they don't like what you've cooked for them. If you're trying to use the TV or the tablet as a reinforcer, it might have lost a little bit of value since they've already had it that morning. So just think about how you can be really effective with some of those things that you mentioned, and how you can use them to your advantage to get more appropriate behavior to happen more frequently. So let's talk about that some more. A couple others that you guys provided are swinging hugs, music, physical activity, and a binky for bedtime. All right, great examples, you guys. Okay, so I mentioned this a little bit already, but sometimes a reinforcer becomes more or less valuable depending on how much access a person has to the item or activity. So these are some terms, some ABA terms, and some things to think about whenever you are using a reinforcer or talking about reinforcement. So deprivation is withholding access to an activity or item to make it more valuable. So an example of this is Ben hasn't seen his bike in a week, and now he is super excited to play with it. So um, you can think of about that. Maybe you try to limit your screen time. So maybe they only get iPad for, an hour in the evenings. You can tell that that item is going to be more valuable because they don't get it all the time. So when you're thinking about teaching a really hard skill or asking them to do something that's not as preferred, think about how you can use the items that they really like. Maybe you can have some of those items on reserve for them, so that they're deprived of those things and they become more valuable as a reinforcer. So on the flip side of that, satiation is another term that we use a lot. So that's having too much or unlimited access to something. So here's an example I thought of. So Penny has been eating fruit snacks all morning, and that's one of her favorite foods. So when her mom says, you can have more fruit snacks if you clean up all of your toys, which is not Penny's favorite activity, she keeps playing with her toys and ignores her mom's request. So you can see here, she's satiated on fruit snacks. She's had them all morning. So she's not as motivated to have them now when asked to do something really hard. So the effort to do one of her least favorite tasks outweighs her desire to have more fruit snacks. So if you think fruit snacks are one of her most valuable reinforcers or something that you can use and access easily, you might want to limit her access to that throughout the day so that you're able to use it when you ask her to do something really difficult. So you can see from the last example that even if something is usually very preferred, so I'm sure her mom knew, she really likes fruit snacks, and kind of assumed that she would want to keep eating fruit snacks. It does not always hold enough value to be used as a reinforcer. So, have either of these affected the reinforcers you tried to use in your daily lives? I would love for you guys to talk about some personal examples of either when you reserved something or deprived your child of something and made something really valuable, or maybe you can recognize one of the times where your child was satiated on something, and maybe we can think about ways that you can give less access to that and make it only used for times of day when they really have to do something difficult. Okay, this is great. So now that I think about it, if he has pretzels as a snack, it doesn't work as well to stop a tantrum. So, yeah, if he has access to it, especially if it's right before something happens or, periodically through the day, it's less valuable when you actually need to use it as a reinforcer. That's a great example. Um, This one says we haven't really used reinforcers in the past, but notice when we did potty training, it worked very well. So, yeah, potty training is a great example of that, where we kind of save really preferred stuff for going to the bathroom on the toilet. So, I'm glad that you got to witness the power of reinforcement, because that can definitely be an effective tool to use any time of day. So, I would encourage you to try to think of those other things, like maybe brushing teeth or taking a bath, or maybe other times of day that are hard, and think about how you can build in some of those reinforcers to make those routines easier as well. Um, okay. So if he's not hungry, a special snack will not be very effective. So yeah, exactly. So maybe your child is really motivated for food most of the time, but let's say they just ate a big lunch or a big dinner. You're exactly right. They're probably not going to be as hungry um, for that item because they're not, or they're not going to be motivated for the food item because they're not as hungry. That's a great example. Okay, and then somebody asked, what are some behaviors we could use the biggest reinforcers for? So I would really think about the things that are hardest for your child. So that could be cleaning up toys, that could be communicating. So let's say they have a really difficult time communicating, and this time they did something, they asked for something all on their own without you having to prompt them, something um, really independent and something that's difficult for them. If they're doing anything like that on their own and appropriately, I would say you could use big reinforcement for any of those things, because we always want to promote them to be more independent and to communicate appropriately. Um, and some of those daily routine activities too, like I mentioned. So maybe they have a really difficult time brushing their teeth, and think about those activities too. They have lots of steps, it takes a lot of time. So maybe, maybe they have a really hard time staying and doing one task for a long period of time. If you get them to do that whole big routine for without engaging in a tantrum, or they do it all appropriately and even try to do something independently, I would say reinforce that as much as you can. And then this is another. So I have yet to find something that works well when we come inside after playing outside or swimming. I'm really glad that you brought this up because it can be really, really challenging to find something as valuable as playing outside, swimming, something that they really don't get very often. I think about that too with our kiddos when, you know, let's say it's been raining for several days and then they get to go outside. Obviously, they're not going to want to come back inside because that's really tricky. I would say, just like we talked about, so if they were to come inside without engaging in some challenging behavior, that's when I'd provide a really, really big reinforcer, if that's something that triggers them to engage in challenging behavior um, frequently. But I know that can be really challenging. I would say just try to keep thinking about things that maybe share some of those same qualities as those activities. So playing outside is a tough one, but if you can notice what they like to play with outside, so maybe they're just really motivated to run around. Maybe you can ask them to go run around inside with you, like in the basement, or maybe they really like to go down the slide. Maybe you get a little slide to put inside that helps them transition inside. For swimming, too, maybe you get like a bucket and do some water play inside, or maybe you go take a bath if they really love the water. Um, try to identify some of those things that might be as similar as you can find them. And then let's see here. So, another question. So, do you have some good examples of reinforcement, something that you use at the center, maybe? So, like we talked about, reinforcers are going to be really specific to what your child likes. So, not everybody is going to like blocks or water play or squeezes or tickles. So, I would say if you have a really hard time identifying reinforcers for your child, maybe just pay attention to what they're doing whenever you're not engaged with them and see what they gravitate toward. And that can really help kind of guide what they're motivated for. So maybe whenever you're doing something in the kitchen, they are going and they are, maybe they're spinning in circles in the living room. So something that maybe you could use as a reinforcer is you could pick them up and you could spin them around. But something that I didn't talk about when talking about effective uses of reinforcement is making yourself in control or involved in that reinforcement. Because obviously, if they have the control of the activity or the item, and you're not in control or um, you're not able to stop them from engaging with the items that they already have access to, then it's probably going to be really difficult for you to get them to do whatever you're wanting them to do. So think about ways that you can engage in those reinforcers or make yourself part of the reinforcement. Um, or, like Greg mentioned, so you could ask your behavior analyst at Bierman to do a reinforcer assessment. Thank you for adding that. So we have preference assessments that we do at the center. So ask your behavior analyst if you're having a hard time at home finding things that they like to do. Ask your behavior analyst to help you come up with ideas for your specific child. And they can do that by using some different assessments in the center. Great addition, Greg. All right. There's something in the Q&A too. Let's see. So this says, how would you respond to people who say it's not good to use rewards because it doesn't teach intrinsic motivation? So that is a really good question. So it's really tough to just assume that somebody is going to be intrinsically motivated. And really, if you think about kids in general, that's not going to come really naturally without being paired with something that they really like. So I would say some of the ways that you can kind of build in that intrinsic motivation or try to encourage some of that intrinsic motivation is using the items or activities that we're talking about and kind of pair those things together. So I'm trying to think of an example. So let's say they are sitting down and doing a worksheet. And so they're doing their problems. And let's say your goal is them doing the problems and them feeling intrinsically motivated to finish that worksheet. But that's not going to happen by itself, or it's not as likely to happen by itself. They're likely going to need, a good job or a thumbs up to keep going in the worksheet, or maybe they need a piece of candy after each couple of problems, and then you can start to fade that candy out. But I would say just pair those social reinforcers like the thumbs up, good job, and things like that, because that's going to keep them, if we can pair those things, one, those are going to be easier to kind of build in, because obviously, the end goal isn't going to be for your child to get a piece of candy every time that they complete a problem. But if you can give them a piece of candy and a thumbs up, maybe you can start to give them a piece of candy every 5 problems and also a thumbs up throughout when they're not getting a piece of candy. So if you kind of pair those things together, then the thumbs up can act as a reinforcer as well. But yeah, that's really tricky to just assume that kids are going to be intrinsically motivated. I would say it's probably pretty necessary for them to have some type of reinforcer, whether that be something small like a thumbs up or a high five or praise, or a tangible item like an iPad or an edible or something. Okay. Let's see. So should I tell my child that we'll do something fun because he did such a good job? I think that's so great. So obviously the times that we want to avoid reinforcing or talking about reinforcers is whenever they're engaged in something that we don't want. So if they have just screamed or, they've just flopped to the floor, because let's say you denied access to something, or you ask them to do something difficult or that they don't want to do, we don't want to provide a statement there. So, avoiding that and trying to prompt them to do something appropriate would be my suggestion. And then after they've done something appropriate, so let's say in this scenario, you have taken away the tablet, from your child. You said, okay, you've had one more minute. I'm going to take the tablet, and they flop to the floor. Instead of saying like, oh, hey, if you get up, we can go watch TV. Instead of saying something like that right then after they've flopped, I would say, okay, they flop on the floor. You can say, hey, let's stand up once they follow your direction to stand up. Or you can say, hey, take my hand, let's go over here. Something that gets them to stop engaging in that challenging behavior. Then if they follow that direction, so you say, okay, hey, let's stand up. They listen to you. Then you can say, hey, I like how you listened. Let's go over here and we can find something else that you want. But I would say just avoid reinforcing when something negative or when something undesirable is happening. And definitely, like you said, so if they've done something appropriate, give them, reinforcement right away, because we want to encourage that and we want them to keep independently doing those things. All right. Really great participation, guys. Thank you for sharing. Okay. We will go ahead and move on then. So, something else to consider when thinking about reinforcement. So, we've talked about lots of ways where we can be more effective when using reinforcers, but also try to think about your immediacy. So, that means giving a reinforcer immediately after the target behavior occurs. So, if the reinforcer occurs too far after the target behavior, then it's likely that your child is not going to put two and two together, and they're not actually going to know why they got that reinforcer in the first place. So, this means that the behavior you were actually trying to reinforce is probably not going to be reinforced because they're not putting those things together. So, making sure that, if they followed your direction to, come into the kitchen the first time, and usually that's really hard for them, make sure you give that reinforcer right away so that they know that's why they got, the thing that they wanted. It's because they listened to coming to the kitchen. Or, if you take that toy away and they stay calm and they go move on to another toy, it's okay to even give that item right back and say, hey, you get another minute because that was really great. I really liked how you stayed calm. So really being immediate with that reinforcement will help them to identify what it is that they did that was good. Okay, another question here. So I feel like my kiddo doesn't comprehend anything when I talk to him, so I find it difficult to say, come to me, or let's try this instead. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of kiddos are going to have those communication deficits or a harder time communicating. So, I would say just try to think about ways that you can prompt them to do something that you want. So if you don't think that they're understanding what you're saying, maybe you could show them what you mean. So in this example, so come with me. Maybe you extend your hand and you walk them to where you want to go. And then I would say just use that language a lot as well. So say, good job coming with me. And then you can give them, a high five or, squeezes or a skittle, whatever they find reinforcing. So I would say just showing them what you want them to do or what your desired outcome is will help them to see what you mean rather than having to listen to come with me. But if you do notice that you are really struggling with stuff like that, please, give that information to your behavior analyst, because that's something that that we can continue working on at the center. And then that's something that they can talk to you about in your parent training, and you guys can come up with strategies about how to approach that and what approach might be best for your child. Okay, let's see here. Okay. So I tried to think of some questions that you guys might have and some answers for you already, but if you do continue to have any other questions, please feel free to type those in the Q&A or in the chat. You can use either feature. So what can I do with this information? We've talked about that in some ways for some of you, but the biggest thing you can do is just catch them being good. So when they do something you really want to see them keep doing, you really want to encourage that. So use your reinforcement to catch them being good and to reward those behaviors when they happen. Again, only provide the reinforcer after the behavior occurs. So we're not going to reinforce when the undesirable behavior is happening. And instead, you're going to prompt something desirable. And then when you see something good happening, so whether they be sharing with their sibling, maybe they requested for something that they usually don't request for, they're cleaning up by themselves, you're going to provide that reinforcer. So like we talked about, immediately provide something preferred. Make sure you have something that is actually reinforcing in that moment so that it's more likely that they're going to do that behavior again in the future. And then providing reinforcement after good behaviors will help ensure that they keep happening and happen more often. So the more that you can catch them being good and focus on the positive and reinforce those behaviors that you want to see, the more you can get ahead of what challenging behaviors might occur. So if you can keep catching them being good, they're going to want to keep getting those reinforcers, and they're going to want to keep doing those things that get them those reinforcers. So just think about that and think about focusing on the positive behaviors. And then what if I discover that I've been reinforcing a behavior that I want to decrease? So we have kind of talked about this a little bit, but let's dive in again. So if you've made that connection, then you're already one step closer to changing that behavior. Awareness is key. So if you identify, oh gosh, every time we go to the grocery store, I give them candy, when they're screaming. You notice that, and that's great. So from now on, we're not going to reinforce that behavior. So just noticing that it's become a pattern is the first step. And then from here, you can stop providing reinforcement for that negative behavior and start teaching your child how to do something more appropriate to access what they want. So that could be pointing to the item, that could be reaching for the item, that could be saying the item's name, anything that's appropriate and anything you would want to see happen again in the future. So here's another example. So Sydney was screaming and stomping her feet while reaching for a box of crackers on the shelf. Sydney's dad said, "You could say, 'I want crackers,'" and Sydney repeated the phrase. So after that, Sydney's dad gave her the crackers. So you can see in this example, Sydney was engaging in an undesirable behavior. She was screaming and stomping. Even though she was reaching, she was also engaging in those undesirable behaviors. So Sydney's dad did not want to reinforce that. So instead, he asked her to repeat a phrase, "I want crackers." And then after she repeated that phrase, that's when he provided reinforcement. So do you guys have any other examples that you can think of that relate to this slide? I'm going to read through some of the other things that you guys said. So my grandson recently started tantruming when he is picked up at the end of the day from Bierman. He will continue the entire drive home. His mother gives him a bottle. He's 3.5 and not on a bottle. So my son does not want to use the bottle on the days he picks him up. How can you reinforce to stop this behavior? So Um, so it sounds like it's kind of hard to know exactly why he's engaging in the tantrum, but it seems like he just might not want to leave Bierman. Maybe it's because of a specific toy he wants to keep playing with, or, he just really likes to be in that environment, which is great. But obviously, we don't want that transition to be rough. So I would say something that you could do is maybe think about things that are really reinforcing for him. Um, in the home setting, and maybe bring a couple of those things along with you. And maybe, like we talked about, maybe you can use deprivation. So he only gets those items in the car whenever he doesn't engage in challenging behavior when he leaves the center. So I'm not sure exactly what he is interested in, but let's say it's an iPad and, crackers or something like that. Then maybe whenever you go to pick him up next time, you have those things available. So by showing him those things before the challenging behavior happens, you're not reinforcing negative behavior because those items are present before he starts to engage in that behavior. So let's say you walk in with those items. Um, you say, okay, it's time to go to the car. He grabs one of those items and maybe he even gets to carry it to the car. Then you let him have it on the whole way home. That can be a really great way, like I said, to kind of get ahead of the challenging behavior and make sure that we're doing what we can from a reinforcement perspective to set him up for success. Because obviously that seems like something that's really difficult for him. Um, and then Okay, so oftentimes he is tantruming at the center already when he knows it's time to go. So in that case, maybe you can have um, his behavior technicians kind of reserve things in the lobby, or something for him that he gets whenever he doesn't engage in those behaviors. But I would say try out just pairing yourself with those reinforcers, walking in with those reinforcers, and seeing if that produces some type of behavior change. You could also think about maybe talk with his behavior analyst about switching up his routine. Maybe he has a really long or too long of an afternoon routine, so he kind of starts to anticipate what's to come. So maybe that routine can be modified or interrupted a bit so that he's not um, anticipating what's going to happen. Um, okay, this one says, our son screams often when he wants something. I like that you said we can have him repeat after us. So, may I have milk, please? Yeah. Providing a prompt is perfect. We can't always just assume that our kids are going to know what we want them to do. So, showing them or telling them what we want them to do can produce really great results. And it can be something really easy for you guys um, to do. So, hopefully, over time, you're not always having to provide that. Hopefully, you've provided enough reinforcement that they just start to use that language on their own. Okay, so my grandson does not want to eat unless he is watching something on TV, iPad, or cell phone. Breaking that has been really hard. So, trying music or distracting him in other ways and making mealtime more fun has been challenging. But you're making progress. That's great to hear. But he's such a picky eater. Mealtime is always a struggle. So, I know that can be really hard. And I know, the screen time and trying to eliminate some of that stuff is really important. So I would say, if it's that specific reinforcer that you feel like you don't want him to keep having, maybe try to talk with your behavior analyst about doing one of those preference assessments like we talked about to come up with some other reinforcers so they can kind of alternate what he's getting. Um, but I would say too, let's say maybe he's mastered, so maybe he's starting to eat some foods well. So maybe he can eat banana and, a peanut butter sandwich or whatever it may be, maybe he's started making lots of progress with those items, then I would just say stop using the TV or the iPad or the cell phone for those things and only use that really high reinforcer for when he's eating foods that are new or that are really non-preferred. And that will also help you deprive the iPad or the TV more so it becomes more valuable for those items that are harder for him. All right, if you guys, oh, let's see, Q&A. Okay, so how would you respond to people who say, oh, wait, no, that one was done. Sorry. Okay. Okay, this one says, meal times are also hard for us. One thing that helps is that I put all the food on the kitchen island. We give our son a plate and then he puts the food on the plate himself with our help. It sometimes helps to get him engaged. So really great suggestion. Thank you for sharing. So sometimes offering choices can be really powerful too. And it sounds like you had some experience with that as well and some success. So, maybe if you're not going to be using one of those really highly preferred items like the TV or the iPad or the phone, then maybe you can say, okay, we have apple or we have banana. You can choose whichever one you want to have. And sometimes giving them some control in that choice can also help that challenging behavior to decrease. So yes, thank you for sharing that strategy. Okay. Oops. All right. Keep asking questions and keep communicating via the chat. But I am going to continue with these FAQs as well. So what can I do to practice this at home? So I would really love to encourage you guys to catch your kids being good. If you can provide reinforcement for those positive behaviors, it'll decrease the likelihood of them happening, of those negative behaviors happening. Try to think of one or two behaviors that your child already engages in that you want to see continue or increase, and provide reinforcement for those behaviors frequently. So, like we talked about, think about the things they're already doing really well and give them reinforcement for that. They're doing a really great job and they're being really appropriate. So, make sure that they know that's a good thing. And then I encourage you to think of one to two behaviors that you want to see decrease and think about some ways that you can provide some of those alternate behaviors to try to increase those appropriate behaviors and decrease those challenging behaviors. And then questions. Do you guys have any other questions? Feel free to type them in the chat since we are a little over on time. I'm just going to go to the last slide really quickly. But here are some take-home points. So if you can't remember everything we talked about, I know we covered a lot. Just try to remember these three things. So reinforcement strengthens the behavior that it follows. So if you find that the behavior you're trying to reinforce is not increasing, it's likely something needs to happen with your reinforcement. So like we said, maybe think about your immediacy. Maybe it's not immediate enough for them to notice what is being reinforced. Maybe you're using an item that is not super motivating for them in that moment. Try to modify your reinforcement to help increase those behaviors. Also, reinforcers can be anything that your child finds motivating. So having several reinforcers to use will help decrease satiation and make sure you always have something to use when you're teaching new skills or trying to encourage any of that positive behavior. And then lastly, if your child engages in a challenging or negative behavior, do not provide reinforcement for that. Instead, teach them how to do something appropriate that will achieve that same outcome. So give them the answer, or tell them what you're looking for, show them what you're looking for, use those prompts to help them learn how to do what you want them to do instead. And then we have one more question here. So what if they are only doing it for the prize, and then when you try to phase out the reward, they stop doing that behavior? Really great question. And that can happen. I would say think about how you can pair other things, like we talked about a little bit earlier, with those tangible items. So let's say you're talking about like a Skittle, and every time, we'll use potty training as an example here too. So every time they go pee on the potty, they get a Skittle. Um, every single time they've gotten into that routine, they want the Skittle. So I would say pair something else with that item. So maybe this time you still give them that Skittle, but you also, cheer for them, give them a high five, do something else that's really encouraging or motivating. And then over time, maybe you can say, okay, they seem to really like when I cheer or do something silly. So this time I'm just going to try to do that without giving the Skittle. And maybe you start to alternate. Every other time they get the Skittle, and then, every 3 times they get the Skittle. But I would say phasing it out as slowly as you can, so that you don't see that pattern of them just, then maybe they start having accidents again. I would just say if you feel like you can fade out that reinforcement, do it as quickly as you can. But if you feel like you're starting to see their behavior shift or decrease again, then build back that reinforcement and think about ways that you can build in some other things or pair some other things, that you don't mind providing every time, or that they won't need every time. All right. Does anybody have any other questions? Well, thank you so much for being here with me tonight. I really enjoyed talking to you about this topic, and I look forward to training with you guys again in this group format. Thank you.